On a warship off the coast of Korea, a man in a surgeon's coat leans over a soldier with a bullet lodged next to his heart. He has never been to medical school. He has never held a scalpel. In 20 minutes, he is going to cut this man open. And the soldier is going to live. His name tag says Dr. Joseph Cyr. That is a real doctor. It is just not this man. This man is Ferdinand Waldo Demara, and across his life, he will convince the world that he is a monk, a professor, a prison warden, and a surgeon, without ever qualifying as a single one of them. Here is the strange part. He was often good at it. Demara did not steal money. He stole something we all guard far less carefully. He stole the little pieces of paper that tell everyone else you are allowed to do the job. Ferdinand Demara was born in 1921 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. His father ran a cinema, and for a while the family was comfortable. Then the Depression took the money, the house, the comfort, all of it, and young Ferdinand decided he was finished with being ordinary. At 16, he ran away to join an order of monks. He wanted to be holy, immediately, without any of the years in between. When the monastery would not give him the rank he felt he deserved, he left. And that became the pattern for his whole life. He wanted the title without the training, the respect without the weight. Everyone else climbs the ladder one rung at a time. Demara looked at that ladder and decided he would simply appear at the top of it. When the Second World War came, he joined the army, then the Navy. And he found that military life still expected him to start at the very bottom. So he did something no honest man ever does. He killed himself. Not really, of course. He left his uniform and his identity card folded neatly on a pier with a note suggesting he had walked into the sea. The Navy struck Ferdinand Demara off its books as a probable suicide. And that was exactly the point. A dead man is not a deserter. A dead man is free. Now he needed a new name. Not an invented one, though. Invented names can be checked and come up empty. He needed a real person with real qualifications who would never notice they had been quietly borrowed. This was the trick at the heart of everything Demara ever did. He would befriend a genuine professional, a doctor, a scholar, a scientist. He would learn their history, their schools, their whole story. And then he would quietly become them, somewhere far away where nobody had ever met the original. He borrowed the identity of a psychologist and became a college dean. He posed as a scholar named Robert Linton French and taught real students. He worked as an engineer, a lawyer's aide, an orderly. Each time, he simply read everything he could find and then acted completely certain. Because that was his real gift. Not medicine, not law, confidence. Demara had worked out that most people never actually check the expert in the room. They only check whether the expert behaves like one. He had 2 rules, and he lived by both of them. Rule 1, the burden of proof is on the accuser. Make them prove you are a fraud, and most people simply never will. Rule 2, when in danger, attack. Act more offended, more certain, more important. Doubt collapses in front of confidence. And he had a third weapon that no rule can teach, a near photographic memory. Demara could read a dense technical book once and hold the pages in his head. Give him one night with a manual, and by morning he could talk like a man who had spent years with the subject. In 1951, he found his greatest disguise. He had befriended a Canadian doctor named Joseph Cyr. Demara memorized the man's whole medical history, borrowed his name, and walked into a Royal Canadian Navy recruiting office offering to serve as a surgeon in the Korean War. There was a war on. The Navy needed doctors badly. And here was a calm, confident, well-spoken man with all the right paperwork, volunteering for a dangerous posting that nobody else wanted. So they barely checked. They gave him a commission, a uniform, and the rank of surgeon lieutenant. They sent him to the destroyer Cayuga, out at sea, as the only doctor for a crew of more than 200 men. Every cut, every fever, every emergency on that ship was now the responsibility of a man who had never even finished high school biology. So Demara did what Demara always did. He got hold of a real doctor's textbook, and he built himself a secret system. Whenever a patient came to him, he would examine them, then slip away to his cabin, lock the door, and read frantically until he knew exactly what to do. He wrote himself a little pocket manual of common problems and quick treatments. He gave a lot of penicillin, dosed everything carefully, and hoped. For weeks it worked. He pulled an infected tooth from the ship's captain. He treated the ordinary aches of life at sea. And nobody suspected a thing. And then the war arrived on his deck. A small boat came alongside the Cayuga carrying 16 Korean combat casualties. They had been shot up badly in a raid. Some of them were close to death. And they were all now looking up at Surgeon Lieutenant Cyr, the only person for miles who could possibly save them. A real surgeon would have found this terrifying. Demara had never performed an operation in his entire life. One man had a bullet sitting right next to his heart. This was not a fever or a toothache. These men would die on the table if he got it even slightly wrong. So he asked for a little time. He had the most badly wounded men prepped for surgery, and then he vanished into his cabin with his textbook. For hours, he read about chest wounds and bullets and the human heart, turning the pages as fast as that extraordinary memory could swallow them. Then he scrubbed in, and he operated on all 16. He opened the chest of the worst wounded man and took out the bullet lodged beside his heart. He worked through the whole night on the others. He was slow. He was careful. And he followed the book almost line by line. And every single one of them lived. 16 critically wounded men, operated on by a fraud who had learned surgery hours earlier from a paperback. Not one of them died. Let that sit for a moment. Because it is the most unsettling thing in this whole story. He was not caught because he failed. He was about to be caught because he had succeeded. Saving 16 men in a war zone is exactly the kind of thing a Navy likes to talk about. An officer wrote up the heroic work of the ship's brave young doctor. And the story of Surgeon Lieutenant Joseph Cyr went out to the newspapers back home in Canada. And that is where it all fell apart. Because there was a real Joseph Cyr. And the real Joseph Cyr was back in Canada, quietly running an ordinary civilian practice, having never once gone anywhere near Korea in his life. His mother read that newspaper. She saw her son's name, praised as a war hero on a destroyer thousands of miles away, and she was baffled. So she telephoned him. And he was, of course, sitting right there at home. Somebody, it was suddenly very clear, was walking around the Korean War wearing Joseph Cyr's name. The real doctor reported it. The message worked its way up the Navy and back out to the Cayuga. Your surgeon is not who he says he is. The crew simply did not believe it. This was the man who had saved 16 lives, who had fixed their teeth and their fevers, who had been calm when the shooting started. They liked him. They defended him. But the Navy insisted, and Demara knew, at last, that the game was over. He locked himself in his cabin for 3 days, and when he finally came out, he did not fight it. There was nothing left to argue. He had been every inch the doctor they had needed, except for the one small fact that he was not a doctor at all. And now the Navy had a problem of its own. If they put him on trial, they would have to explain, in public, how an imposter with no training had been handed a surgeon's rank and a whole ship full of patients. That story made them look ridiculous. So they did the quiet thing. They took away his uniform, put him off the ship, and let him walk. No prison. No court. The Royal Canadian Navy would rather forget the entire business than admit, out loud, just how easily it had been fooled. You would think a man that publicly exposed would finally stop. Demara did not stop. He could not. He turned up again as a schoolteacher on a remote island in Maine under yet another borrowed name. And he was unmasked again. A magazine ran his whole extraordinary story, and his real face became famous, which is an absolute disaster for a man whose entire trade is not being recognized. A writer named Robert Crichton turned his life into a best-selling book. Hollywood made a film out of it, with Tony Curtis playing him. Ferdinand Demara, the man who had spent his whole life stealing other people's names, was now hopelessly trapped inside his own. Now everyone knew his face. No hospital, no college, no Navy would ever hand him a role again. The one thing he was truly brilliant at, becoming other people, had been taken away from him forever by his own fame. And here is the ending you would never write for him. Late in his life, Demara finally did the one thing he had spent decades faking. He earned it. He became an ordained minister, a genuine one, under his own real name, and he served as a chaplain in a California hospital. For once, nobody had to check his papers, because this time the papers were finally true. He sat with the sick and the dying and comforted them. He grew close to the actor Steve McQueen and gave him his last rites in 1980. It was the one role that nobody could ever expose, because it was the one role that he actually was. Ferdinand Demara died in 1982, and every patient he ever operated on had lived. Think about what that really means. The world spent his whole life checking his certificates and never once checking the man. And most of the time, the man could genuinely do the job. That is the uncomfortable lesson he left behind. We do not really trust people. We trust the paperwork that stands in for them. Demara simply worked out that if you forge the paperwork, the trust comes free. He never once asked whether he could do the job. He just took the title and then made himself worthy of it, one stolen textbook at a time. If you want to see a con built the exact opposite way, a man who forged not a person, but a whole country's money and made a real national bank print it for him, I've got that story waiting right over here. But tell me honestly in the comments, if a calm, confident man in a white coat walked in with all the right papers and all the right answers and told you he was the doctor, would you have asked him to prove it? Or would you have laid down on the table?